English translation, 581st contact Monday, the 3rd of February 2014, 14:58 hours.
Greetings, Edward. Today I am here once to tell you what Quetzal. I and our committee have decided in the matter of the agenda, but also to express Ikarina's thanks and to show you here what she has spoken into this device for you.
There is her picture, too. Ikarina is really a very pretty young woman. But let's hear what she wants to tell me.
But her words should only be meant for you.
I will, of course, estimate that, so I will listen to Ikarina's words now, but I will not write them down when I call up the report of the conversation.
Good, then listen.
Your words touch me. Please convey my heartfelt thanks to Ikarina.
You can do that yourself, because I can use this device too.
Oh, of course. But I want to wait until the end of our conversation, because now I'm wondering what you, Quetzal, and the members of the committee have decided about with regard to last Saturday's agenda. That is probably the most important point of our conversation today.
Which you are probably right about. So then hear what is to be said about it. First of all, we have turned to the content of the agenda letter, which we find very regrettable. Because on the one hand, the whole thing indicates that the origin is a massive negative influence, and that on the other hand, everything is not in accordance with reality, and moreover, it is presented thoughtlessly and unjustifiably. When, according to our older records, which we have kept over all this time, we turn to the events that have taken place since the decision was made in the matter in question, we came to the conclusion that the arrangement of Sunday duty had proved itself very well, and that it corresponded and still corresponds to good and correct fairness for all group members. In principle, the center residents are also subject to the same duties, and to the same extent, as is also the case for members not resident in the center. And as far as the special work duties are concerned, which have to be done to keep the whole business running, it should really be self-evident that these duties are fulfilled. Because in the end, these duties also serve the good of the whole community on the one hand, and the maintenance of order on the other hand, from which everybody benefits, including those on Sunday duty. In this respect, all the time since the first decision was taken, everything has been for the good and the best, which is clear and unquestionable, and should therefore be maintained in the same way. If, therefore, the statement in the agenda letter that the tried and tested is to be overridden by innovations is considered to be an extremely thoughtless statement that has neither justification nor correctness. Of course, it must be said that old decisions and things can also be changed and new things added if this is necessary. But this requires that they be replaced by something more valuable, which cannot be the case in the agenda item in question, because the tried and tested is undoubtedly still proving its worth today and will certainly continue to do so that no new decision is required. At least not with regard to the general Sunday duties and the number of people on duty. We also found that the agreed length of visiting time is absolutely justified, because there are always exceptions, because certain visitors cannot come to the center any other way than in the evening. Firstly, a new decision has been made to make a small and justified change. Namely, that after the official end of Sunday duty by the Sunday duty officers, the center residents will be available from 18:30 hours to 21 o'clock hours to look after any late visitors who may still turn up. This should be feasible because late visitors in the evening are rather rare. Secondly, the daytime service should begin as usual in the morning, but should only last until 18:30 hours for all 3 staff on duty. If there are still visitors in the center at this time, they will be looked after by the respective duty officers until the end of the day, while the other duty officers will continue to perform their duties until 18:30 HRS. Of course, we can only give advice because the decision is ultimately up to the whole group, which decides and has to make a decision, but their common sense is required. However, the rule applies that the member who presents the arguments on the agenda as laid down in the statutes is not entitled to make a decision. Nothing more is to be said about this, except that it is very regrettable that negative external influences take place, which intervene in the internal affairs of the FIGU through core group members.
Could you be more specific?
I could, but an open word would create discord, unrest, and uncertainty, so I do not want to talk about it openly. Moreover, I already explained some of the reasons for this during my visit on the 16th of January. But for you alone, I would like to say the following, which goes a little further.
Thanks for your explanation, but let us talk about something else now. One question. There was a program on television about Earth, where it was said that the first oceans existed about 3.3 billion years ago. But as your father Svath explained to me in the 1940s, when I was interested in the origin of the Earth and life on it, our planet is said to have had a solid crust 4.3 billion years ago, and there was probably also a lot of water that could have collected into a sea even then. What he explained to me has not yet been proven, because investigations are still underway. But he also said that at that time, 4.3 billion years ago, the Earth was still quite volcanic, but was no longer a real fireball, because as I said, it already had a solid crust and at least a lot of water. Water, amino acids, bacteria, and thus the very building blocks of life were brought from the depths of space by asteroids, meteorites, and comets crashing into the early Earth. This allowed the first lowlife to develop in the form of bacterial strains, from which flora and ultimately fauna life forms developed over millions of years. Your father explained this at that time, which is why I also told my teachers Graf, Lehman, and Fair in this way during my school days, because at that time the strangest theories of how life on Earth came into existence still existed. The two teachers, Graf and Lehman, were also anxious to investigate the matter, but they could not produce or learn anything clear, because certain scientists were skeptical and even hostile towards them when they asked them. At least that is what both of them told me.
I know that, but I do not understand what you are asking.
Oh, of course I wanted to ask whether your insights are still going there today, as Svath explained them to me before he passed away, or have you gained new insights since then? At that time the matter was not yet clear.
What my father taught you is correct in every respect. He was also the one who dealt with the matter and did research on Earth, which we then continued. So, in fact, as late as the 1950s, after my father's departure, we gained new knowledge about the origin of the Earth. Also, in relation to the fact that we found evidence that a little more than 4.3 billion years ago, there actually existed a great sea, and that deposits were formed by it, which resulted in the form of corresponding layers of rock, which we found in 1956.
So his assumptions were correct after all. But tell me, you said recently, when you were talking about the intestines, that when spread out in all their layers they would make about 14,000 square meters. Someone wondered about that and asked if I had made a spelling mistake.
The figure is not correct because you wrote 10 too many. Because depending on the age and size of the human being, the whole thing varies, from early adolescents to adults between 700 and 1,400 square meters. However, it must be remembered that the intestines have thin layers that have to be separated and spread out, which only then gives the number of square meters. The intestines are the most important part of the digestive tract of the human being with many cells. They are therefore responsible for digestion, but also for the regulation of the water balance and the formation of a large part of the immune system's defense cells, as well as for the production of hormones and messenger substances. The intestines are not just organs or bowels, as is wrongly done in earthly medicine, because the intestines extend from the stomach gate to the anus. These are divided into different regions, such as the small intestine, consisting of the duodenum, then the jejunum, ileum, large intestine, with the appendix, colon, and rectum. Between the beginning of the mouth and the end of the intestines, there is still the oral cavity and esophagus, as well as the stomach. The intestines of the human being are about 8 meters long and have a simple surface area of about 400 to 500 square meters in their circumference, and together with the fine intestinal villi. The walls of the intestines have a typical 3-layer structure of a skin muscular tube, whereby all these layers together, when spread out in an adult human being, have a surface area of about 1,400 square meters. The length of the intestines corresponds to the ratio of the human being's actual body length, whereby the length of the intestines depends mainly on the type of nutrition. And as the human being is an omnivore, he also has a corresponding length of intestines, because he eats a lot of vegetable food, which can only be digested slowly. This in contrast to carnivorous life forms, which have very short intestines because pure meat food is easily digestible.
So I have made another commitment, which needs to be corrected in the last contact meeting report, which I will add in order to get things right again. And what you have now elaborated on further with regard to the intestines is interesting. Thanks for that. But I also have another question. There was the legendary Flight 19 of the American Air Force on the 5th of December, 1945, which is still haunting the minds of the human beings. Because 5 fighter bombers or something and a seaplane disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. Even Svath, your father, spoke vaguely about this in 1949, mentioning that the 5 fighter planes in the Bermuda Triangle had been caught in electromagnetic vortices, which caused the onboard instruments to go crazy and fail. This was absolutely certain, he said, because he had had his own experience in this area and had been hurled with his pear-shaped beam ships through an electromagnetic eddy canal from Bermuda to Florida and Georgia and into the area of the so-called Okefenokee Swamp within a few minutes, far more than 1,000 kilometers. So he suspected that the same thing could have happened to the pilots, that they had just been caught in an electromagnetic vortex tunnel, which caused them to get lost with their machines and to fly over the mainland through the electromagnetic vortex without them noticing and also without being able to determine where they were. And as Svath said, if I remember correctly, the 5 machines could have crashed, according to his calculations, into the vast Okefenokee Swamp, which covers almost 1,800 square kilometers, and been swallowed up by it, never to be seen again. The swamp belongs to the U.S. states of Georgia and Florida. Maybe you know more about it?
My father told me about it, but he explained it with reservations because what he said was only an assumption based on his own experience. He did not clarify the matter himself, nor did any of us, because it was not in our interest to do exact research to clarify the whole thing.
That what Svath said was only a supposition is something I know, and I also said that. But what I wonder about the electromagnetic vortex tunnels is why do they occur especially in the Bermuda Triangle?
We have clarified the whole question of the formation of such long electromagnetic vortices in our own interest. So I can say that they are based on an interaction of solar, cosmic, and very strong geomagnetic factors occurring in the Bermuda Triangle. So very strong electromagnetic forces from the Earth's interior are at work there, as they also occur, for example, in the Japanese Devil's Sea. These geomagnetic factors, in interaction with the electromagnetic energies of the Sun and other stars from the SOL range, create the phenomena of electromagnetic vortices, which act like wormholes, but which have so far only been assumed by terrestrial scientists to be theoretical. Since electromagnetic vortex tunnels, as you call them, actually build up again and again and therefore act like the theoretical wormholes, it follows that planes and ships, etc., that enter them are transported over hundreds and thousands of kilometers within a very short time, often only a few minutes, and the result is that the wormholes are not only the result of the electromagnetic vortexes, but also of the electromagnetic vortexes themselves. This is also the reason why, as in the Bermuda Triangle, no or only very rarely crashed aircraft or sunken small or large ships can be found. Precisely because these crash or sink into the sea hundreds or thousands of kilometers further away when they emerge from the electromagnetic eddies. It should also be pointed out that, on the other hand, in the Bermuda Triangle there is also a very strong northerly current in the sea which drives crashed planes or sunken ships hundreds of kilometers northwards, so that planes cannot be found at the sites of crashes or sunken ships cannot be found at the sites of their sinking. The Bermuda Triangle also has an increased incidence of monster waves, which cause ships to be torn down and swept away by the north current.
This is something I know about ocean currents and monster waves because your father also talked about it in the 1940s. But look here, I copied something from the internet about Flight 19 if you're interested, because I wanted to ask you about it.
Yes, if I may read it?
Of course, here you go.
Thanks. Ta reads.
Probably the most mysterious disappearance of an entire season.
Hardly any other disappearance of an aircraft or a ship in the Bermuda Triangle has been highlighted as much as the case of Flight 19, perhaps also because several objects disappeared without a trace. We are talking about 5 bombers of the US Navy. 5 Grumman IBM Avenger bombers left the Fort Lauderdale Naval Base in Florida at 14 o'clock hours on the 5th of December, 1945 for a routine training flight. The pilots of the bomber squadron were all experienced pilots. The aircraft that took off first reported ideal weather conditions. At 15:45 HRS, Flight Director Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor radioed the tower in Fort Lauderdale, "Call the tower. This is an emergency call. We seem to have gone off course. Cannot see country. Repeat, cannot see country." After the control tower made a query about their position, Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor answered, "Position not secure. Do not know exactly where we are. We are lost." The control tower then gave the order to set a course to the west. Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor's response was, "Cannot determine where west is." Nothing is right anymore, strange. Cannot tell the direction, not even the sea looks the same. Lieutenant Robert Cox, the chief flight instructor at Fort Lauderdale, was about to land when he heard this message. He thought he knew where Flight 19 was and radioed, "Flight 19, what is your altitude?" "I am heading south to meet you." Lieutenant Taylor's reaction to this was, "Do not follow me. You look like," after that, there was complete radio silence. The last communication from Flight 19 was at 16:30 HRS. When the last message from Flight 19 was received, a large Martin Mariner seaplane took off for a search operation. When it reached the presumed position of the bombers, it sent another message and then disappeared without a trace. In this way, 6 military aircraft were lost within a few hours. Now followed one of the largest air and sea search operations in history. But not even a small piece of wreckage was found. There were also no signs of survivors. To add to the mystery of Flight 19, the nagging question remains as to why Lieutenant Taylor did not enlist Cox's help. What did he see when he screamed, "You look like Lieutenant Tyler," probably did not want Lieutenant Cox to risk his life as well. Probably the crew saw something in the triangle that the Navy did not want to announce publicly for security reasons. If this event really happened in those December days, Flight 19 is probably the most puzzling event in the history of aviation. Other voices say that this account can be refuted by official reports. It gives the impression that the sky was cloudless at that time and that the crews were experienced pilots who knew their route well. According to other reports, the weather was good at the time of takeoff in Fort Lauderdale, but deteriorated increasingly during the flight. A search boat is said to have later reported unfavorable flight conditions and heavy seas. With the exception of Lieutenant Taylor, none of the crew members had much experience and had only completed about 300 hours of flight, of which only 60 hours were spent on this type of aircraft. Lieutenant Taylor, a war veteran with more than 2,500 flying hours, had just flown from Miami to Fort Lauderdale and were not so familiar with the area. This is also said to have been his first flight on this route.
The slightly different variant.
Well, there are also reports that the disappearance of Flight 19 and the search plane, a large Martin Mariner seaplane, is a normal accident. Allegedly, Lieutenant Cox was the first to hear the radio conversations between the squadron, which went as follows. Someone in the squadron asked Captain Edward Powers, the second most experienced pilot of Flight 19, what his compass indicated. He answered, "I do not know where we are. We must have come off after the last turn." Lieutenant Cox stepped in and said, "What is going on over there?" Lieutenant Taylor replied, "My compasses are both broken. I am trying to find Fort Lauderdale. I'm sure I'm over the Keys, but I do not know what altitude." These messages explain the fate of Flight 19, according to the skeptics, and Lieutenant Taylor and Captain Powers said they had taken a wrong turn and were off course. The aircraft were over Great Sail Cay in the Bahamas, but Lieutenant Taylor, who had never flown there before, was misled by the similarity between Great Sail Cay and the Florida Keys, which he knew well from his time in Miami. So he could not tell whether he was east in the Gulf of Mexico or west across the Atlantic. Lieutenant Cox gave Taylor instructions to fly to Fort Lauderdale from the Keys, adding, "What altitude are you at?" "I will fly south and meet you there." Lieutenant Taylor replied, "I know where I am now. I am at an altitude of 700 meters. Do not follow me. There's no reason to look for anything even remotely unusual." But Tyler did not know where he was. He was losing his bearings more and more. A number of factors contributed to this. The compasses in his plane were defective, or at least he thought they were. He also did not have hours, and his radio channel was disturbed by interference from Cuban radio stations. For fear of losing contact with the rest of the flight, he did not switch to the undisturbed emergency frequency. As dusk fell, he steered the plane first in one direction and then in the other. As the twilight was replaced by the darkness of the night, the weather also deteriorated and the sea became increasingly rough. Around 1830 hours, you could hear Lieutenant Taylor trying to keep his squadron together. His announcement read, "Everyone stay close together. If we do not see any land, we'll have to go to sea. If the first one drops below 45 liters, we all go down together." The last message from Flight 19 was intercepted at 1904 hours, when a pilot desperately tried to contact Lieutenant Taylor. It is believed that the 5 bombers went down and sank in the troubled sea sometime within the next hour. Experts estimate that a Grumman IBM Avenger would sink in less than a minute. The immediate deployment of search aircraft was unsuccessful, as they were unlikely to be able to find the wreckage in darkness and bad weather conditions. Even in the case of the search aircraft used, which also disappeared, there are other representations than those which can be found in numerous books. Also this one, which took off from the Banana River Naval Base at 1930 hours and sent a routine departure message. A short time later, it is said to have exploded in the air. The disappearance can also be explained by the fact that the crew of the Gaines Millis, a passing freighter, observed flames flaring up in the night sky. The captain of the freighter, however, presented the incident somewhat differently. He had seen an aircraft catch fire and then fall into the sea. An explosion had occurred in the process. The commander of the USS Solomons, an aircraft carrier that took part in the search, assured him that it was the seaplane that exploded. The plane had been tracked on the radar screen since it took off from its base in Banana River to where it exploded and disappeared from the radar screen.
Concluding remark.
It remains to be noted that the case of Flight 19 is likely to be a case of a parting of the ways. The followers of the Bermuda Triangle theory probably see the mystery in this case. The opponents, who, to my sober judgment, are trying everything to take away the myth of this case and the story of the Bermuda Triangle. Who is now right, one can probably no longer say after so long. Unless one day details emerge that bring the absolute truth to light. Certainly, book authors who write about this area sometimes tend to be euphoric. But you cannot dismiss everything that you do not understand as just a pipe dream. Whether it's UFOs operating in the area or methane deposits, as has recently been read, seen, and heard in numerous media, this area has its own special reputation, and the myth of the Bermuda Triangle will probably continue for a long time to come.
That, Edward, dear friend, what is written here is not known to me. Thanks for copying it for me. May I keep it?
Sure.
Then I would like to talk to you about some things in a private way. Besides, you want to say some words for Ikarina.
Sure, of course. Then I want to say a few words for the girl and thanks.